Anyways, this is Derek Logue from OneSpawn.com, and I'm here with Tom Madison, my good buddy from Oregon Action Committee, and we are going to discuss a very important topic because the 10-year anniversary of the first successful public demonstration of registered citizens and their families took place back on December 1st, 2007. So the 10-year anniversary is coming up really soon. And of course, Tom here was the organizer for that event. And so, you know, he's going to give us a very rare behind-the-scenes look at how this thing came together, what it took to put it together, some of the events that happened behind the scenes, and everything. So, Tom, you know, I know we discussed a couple of years ago about the first actual attempt in Miami, Florida to organize and have a public demonstration that kind of didn't work out according to plans. I guess you wouldn't really call it a success and stuff. So what got you to just kind of come up with doing one in Columbus, Ohio, of all places?
Right. Well, and first of all, I have to be careful here. I want to say that project we did in Columbus, Ohio at the state capitol building would not have happened without the input from a lot of other people. So I've had a small part of it, and maybe being the guy that wrote the check at the end of the process and handed to the state treasurer and said, "Thank you for the use of your property in Ohio at the state capitol." But the project was really the work of a lot of different people. I mean, some of the work was delegated to individuals to handle certain aspects of it, whether it was raising money or whether it was putting together the guest speakers and how we would have them arranged and what order they would speak in. Other parts of it were just getting the permission of the state to be there on their grounds and making sure that equipment like speakers and microphones are all working, all of that. So there's a lot of different kinds of people in different categories doing different kinds of efforts to make the Columbus rally. We called it the Columbus Rally successful back there in December. In fact, December 1st of 2007, which, by the way, was only 6 months after our foray into the city of Miami Beach, Florida, there that day in, I think it was June of 2007, where we had visited the the registrants living under the bridge at the Julia Tuttle Causeway Bridge and their plight and so forth, and having tried to have meeting with the media there that day. So just a reference point. So in 2007 we had two pretty big events. One starting in June of 2007, city of Miami Beach, Florida, and then 6 months later, roughly in December, like we're talking about with regard to Columbus, and bringing attention to the what was billed as the coming of the Adam Walsh Act to the state of Ohio. And the Adam Walsh Act was a law. It became a law anyway after our efforts, but the program was to have media coverage, which we did, and to give our presentations, one after the other. I think we had 11 presentations. And we had about 50 people show up. I think maybe amongst those 50 people were some undercover officers. We also had on the sidewalk outside of our immediate area were counter-protesters, which I found interesting. I didn't realize they'd have the numbers they had. It wasn't too many, but it seemed like they numbered 15 or 20. And then an entire phalanx of police cars on the outer sidewalk parking areas along the street surrounding the area, not expecting, who knows what they expected, but it was certainly interesting that so many showed up. I mean, for the measly $850 that we paid to have our presentation that day on the steps of the Capitol, they spent a hell of a lot more with those the police protection and making sure a riot doesn't break out, I suppose.
You got your little thing kind of hanging out there. Now, for the sake of people who are watching this who might not be completely familiar with what happened in Ohio, I can do that because I live in Ohio and everything. Under the old law in Ohio, we had 3-tier classification system. Level 1's registered once a year for 10 years, level 2's registered twice a year for 20 years, and level 3's registered for life. that increased with the AWA because level 1s was now 15 years registration, level 2s was now 25. And of course, we went from risk-based assessment to classification based upon offense, and what that meant was that you had roughly 18% or so of people on the highest level, and under the AWA it jumped up to like 54%. So it was a huge deal. A lot of people's lives are going to be ruined, forced to register for longer, even if you're on level 1s. And so this just kind of happened to pop up at the right time because it just passed, steamrolled its way through legislation, and it came right after the news came out, I think right about the time of the event in Miami. So I guess you didn't really have to do much jumping from Florida to Ohio to get something going. You remember some of the people that were involved back then, or some of the groups involved back then, because maybe some of these people some of the groups we wouldn't recognize today because most of them don't exist anymore.
Yeah, and I'm almost hesitant to name any names because as soon as I name Bill, Bob, and Jerry, there's going to be half a dozen others that deserve mentioning. So I'm probably not going to mention anybody specifically, but to say that a lot of the active groups 10 years ago were certainly participating, except one or two, and that's okay. They had their reasons, and I don't fault them too much. Excuse me. But I think that it was a successful effort mainly in the contribution of the men and women who lived in Ohio, because it affected them. After all, that's what the whole point is. Senate Bill 10 was going to be something that turned the lives of registered families upside down. And so we got a tremendous amount of help from individuals participating by donating a suit, for example, a nice men's suit to me. Nice looking suit, that's the one I wore that day. Other people supplied food and supplied transportation to bring people to the event there in Columbus. It wasn't just the city of Columbus. I mean, we had people coming from all over the state of Ohio, and not just that, but also outside the state too, from Florida. I was from Oregon. We had other states in the surrounding state area of Ohio. So it was a decent turnout. But again, thanks to the many people that supplied materials, labor, money to make it all possible.
Yeah, as I recall, I know you're from Oregon. We had some people from Texas, from Florida, West Virginia, as well as Ohio. I mean,
Yes.
most of us there were from Ohio. I came myself as a participant, not as I was merely a spectator to this event. How long did it take for y'all to organize the event?
I remember it beginning about 4 months before the event. Senate Bill 10 was on the hot track in Ohio legislature. It was going to happen fairly quickly. It turned out it'd be signed into law, passed and signed into law the next year in January, February, I think. So we were just ahead of it. So we knew we had to act quick. But the undertaking a project of that size was big, because we'd only had some success in Miami. A handful of us, 5 of us there. We knew we had to ramp this up, and that meant more phone calls, more conference calls, that is, involving at any one time. Week to week, you'd have 10 people, sometimes 20 people on a single conference call. And so that can be a bit chaotic. But we managed to figure out how we wanted to go about it.
You had a pretty large planning committee in comparison.
Absolutely.
It's like far bigger in comparison to, say, the rally and tally.
Absolutely. And again, the vast majority of those were Ohioans wanting to pitch in various ways. So I give a lot of credit to that. Again, I'm just a guy that has a few ideas, but a lot of the work, a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Ohioans to make that all possible. I'm a small part of that, and I want to make that very clear. I appreciate all that they were able to do to make it all possible.
Yeah. And of course, you went out and you tried to advertise this stuff. And of course, this brings up the wonderful troll organizations, because back then we had Absolute Zero and some other people. When they found out, and just so unfortunately for us, it just so happened that one of the main troll nests was headquartered right there in Columbus, Ohio. So they showed up. They had the little sign, "Cry me a river, sex offender." You have the right to remain silent.
WASP.
Yeah, WASP.
Women Against Sexual Predators, based in Cincinnati, or based in Columbus, Ohio. And I remember communicating with some of their leaders maybe a month and a half before our event. They were absolutely disbelieving that we would actually have a conference or any kind of a presentation on the steps of the Capitol. They couldn't believe that we had the gall to pull this off. And I assured them, oh yeah, we'll be there, and we're looking forward to seeing you there, and maybe we can have a conversation on the side, a peaceable one, to share notes and maybe get along, because I think we have a lot in common if we're talking about peace, we're talking about criminal justice that works for everybody, make sure that we don't malign people for the rest of their lives, and all the rest of the kinds of things you could imagine having with a conversation with a group like that.
Well, I'll fast forward to the actual day of the event. There's not really much discussed behind the scenes and everything, because I think most people know how these events kind of come together. But, so fast forward to actually showing. I was a participant. I showed up early, and they were setting up everything. And of course, what I saw when coming to the event is, here's the State House. There's this big, here's this big open field with, here's this little monument that also serves as a podium where they're setting up all they got the tables out, the chairs out, and people are starting to organize. And I come and I see a line of law enforcement agents, which I guess were paid for by that $800 that y'all spent. And then I see the bikers against child abuse people. They were there, and then WASP was there. Of course, we outnumbered them at least 2-1, maybe more, and everything. And they had their silly little signs and everything. Do you think that there's the possibility, and I've heard this from other people, do you think the possibility that some people got scared either by the law enforcement being there, or by the vigilantes being there?
Yeah, my take is that the people that said they would be there that did not show, and by the way, the number of people that didn't show, I would be guessing to say 150, 200 people, and we expected about 300 to 400 people in total, but that was our expectation. So when we saw 50 people in the crowd, we're rather unhappy about that, but at least they showed up. But to answer your question, I think the reason that those who said they would and did not was the police presence there, not the vigilantes, not the bikers. I think they probably felt safe enough with so many policemen around that nothing was going to happen. But that if they were I guess they were so intimidated by law enforcement to see so many law enforcement there, they might get in trouble with the probation officer, parole officer, be in violation of some law somehow, as to get arrested again. And so I think that was the bigger reason.
Yeah, I think that's what one of the attorneys that were there probably said that was a possible reason. You didn't really feel it, so you didn't feel at all really that much intimidated by the vigilantes. I want to say this much because I don't know. I mean, you were in the middle. Obviously you're up on the stage and all this, so you couldn't see what was going on behind you. Now, if you was to Google the State House, there's this big, there's the big field. There's this little thing, on the other side of it's like some kind of a monument to Taft or something. I can't remember, but on the other side it's flat, and it kind of does like this. It kind of does like a half circle thing, and whatever. And then on each side there's, there's some fencing, and then there's some shrubbery, some nightly, they nicely trim it and everything to look pretty. Well, halfway, about a third of the way through the event, the BACA group, the biker group, they started, they organized behind the podium and stuff, because there's like that space between that backdrop and the shrubbery, and they're just kind of peeking around the corners, almost like the Hatfields and McCoys. That's what I've always described it. And of course, law enforcement, they chased them off, and when they had more problems.
There was one biker guy that came up out of the audience. He came within maybe 12 feet of me, and he was tall, lean, and I know that he could kick my what. And he's probably 6'2" and weighed the proverbial 240, but he was intimidating, and he gave me some intimidating looks, but I just kept going and didn't pay attention to him. I knew what he was trying to do, so it didn't bother me too much, but again, it was amazing that he attempted to bully me a little bit.
Yeah. Speaking of the drama, because since we're talking more about the behind the scenes and what it took to put this together, because people could see the rally on the internet, so I don't have to go do the play-by-play of like the day itself. But was there a lot of conflict between any of the people behind the scenes in either during the course of putting it together or maybe afterwards that might be worth discussing?
I think probably so. December 1st in Ohio, it's getting cold. The day's high, I would guess, was intended would be about I'd be guessing to say 55 degrees as a high. This is the midday noontime type hour, 10 o'clock to noon. So the wind is blowing 5 to 15 miles an hour, and the temperature it's probably 50 degrees at the most, maybe at that point in time. So it was uncomfortable, and we had a dozen speakers, and I was the person to introduce each of the speakers, which I did. I may have taken too long at the beginning, Derek, to do my spiel. I had a 20-minute talk when it should have been about 5 minutes, and I regret to this day I talked way too long because other people had a lot of great things to say. So I'll self-criticize and say that I should have been a lot quicker with my message and get on with the introductions. But as far as cooperation goes, there was a lot of people were generous with their time. They shivered in the cold, and they waited their turn. They gave great presentations, and the minister at the very end gave a very heartwarming talk and motivational talk as to what it takes to win a movement of our sort and what we're trying to accomplish. So I give a lot of kudos to everybody on the speaking team, the dozen or so that came. But of course, the hearts were captured by maybe the eighth speaker, a teenage girl, 16 years old. Her brother's on the sex offender registry in Ohio. I forget her name, and I apologize about that. But to add that, it was probably the best speech of the entire day and won the hearts of everybody.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the one that we were never given, that we unfortunately aren't given permission to show, so people unfortunately won't be able to see it. And to me, that's disappointing. And I mean, it was a public event anyway. So and she was and the thing about it is she's mentioned in the Columbus Dispatch article, which of course that ties into the next thing we're going to talk about, the media presence. I mean, we would have thought that. I mean, in retrospect, probably thinking now that considering what you were doing, considering
what we naive.
We would have thought that, boy, we would have got a hell of a lot more headlines than we did.
Yeah. Well, the TV crews showed up. I mean, at least two teams. I'm not sure if all the Columbus area network affiliates showed up, but two of them did. And I was happy about that. We started the program on time. They didn't stay very long. I guess the message that they thought they would be covering would be about victims' rights, about victims of sex abuse. It seemed, I'm not sure why they left early, but after probably 30 minutes, they were in their trucks and on the way. When it played finally later that day on television, what's hilarious, they covered nothing about our conference, about what speakers had to say and so forth. What they did was cover the anti-protesters on the outside, or the protesters against us on the sidewalks that Derek was mentioning earlier. And so I had this one scene, I think it was the NBC affiliate in Columbus, where they would show in the foreground these protesters protest against predators and pedophiles and child molesters. In the back you could hear the muffled voices of some of our speakers on the stage at that time. But the story was about the protest against the pedophiles and child molesters who came to the city to defend their rights.
Well, maybe possible that they partially thought that this was going to be like some kind of NAMBLA event. I mean, these are the same people. May not be the exact same person to a T, but they were the exact same group that tried to disrupt things a few years later in Albuquerque. And you remember when we went to the conference, and there was a lot of energy there because AZU had contacted the media and told them, here's this pedophile convention coming to town. And
even the governor had to speak out and say she doesn't support our movement there and our participation in the state of New Mexico, let alone Albuquerque. So.
Yes, well, it kind of backfired on them because when people come and see us, they realize that, hey, we're not a bunch of, we're not supporting pedophilia, whatever that's supposed to mean. I thought that was very interesting. The Columbus Dispatch did a fairly decent job.
They did.
At least they covered both sides. I mean, they interviewed you. The girl that did the 16-year-old girl who did the great speech, she was cited in there. Of course, they Absolute Zero got mad because one of their members got mentioned by name, and then they tried to cover it up. It's like, oh, it wasn't really her; it was just somebody else, and you guys went after.
Well, one of the oddities of the Columbus Project on that December 1st day in 2007 was the fact that once this 16-year-old girl had given her talk, there seemed to be some pulling back of wanting her identity given out, both there at the event, but also later on as various videos began to surface and show the event to various YouTube channels. It was as if there was some consternation among the members participating. They didn't want her shown, or if you did show it, we would sue you. And after the event, back in our homes, 2 weeks later, there's a lot of this infighting going on. And I was thinking to myself, well, where did that come from? I thought we were a group that came together to work together, produced a good product, I thought. And it may not have been perfect, but by the same token, it was certainly in advance over what we had in Miami. I saw this as a stepping process of moving up a step of successes to greater and greater national prominence, ultimately, but it was derailed because of this, I'm not sure what the word would be, I'm not sure what it was exactly that caused this breaking up of a movement that I thought could have gone a long way.
Well, I think you were busy at that time. I mean, I could fill the gaps in that narrative because at that time you were busy putting this together. And you created this organization called So Clear Media, which we're kind of familiar with now because we've been kind of keeping it afloat for a long time, more or less. But you were busy doing that stuff. And like I said, at that time, I was just somebody who, I was an up-and-comer back then. I mean, hard to believe there was a time when I was new to this whole thing. And, 2006, 2007, I was relatively new to the cause and everything. But what I saw was I was a part of what was at that time the biggest organization, although there wasn't a lot of activity. I mean, this, as I like to say, this is when our movement pulled itself out of the primordial ooze, because back then RSOL was little more than an online petition. SOSN had just pulled itself out from being a Yahoo group. They were a Yahoo group for the first 3 or 4 years of their existence, and then they decided, well, we're going to do our own website, and they came up when they had a forum. So what happened was this other group, the one that I was in, the conservatives within the group had said, well, we don't value this kind of event, and unless you're going to have like a 1 million man march and stuff, then this is not going to be successful. Right. And a lot of people were upset because they were belittling what had happened. Yeah, there was only 50 of us there, and so they considered it these conservatives considered it a failure. And I'm like, well, okay, this is our first attempt at doing something. And a lot of people was.
Yeah, I think that gets back, though, to this concept of looking for that ultimate Messiah to lead us to the promised land. In this case, it wasn't a person in the form of a Messiah, but it was in the form of an event that was going to be the event that solved all events, all future problems. It will be the record, the official record of defeating the sex offender registry in 50 states and at the federal government level. It was going to be a blowout event, and that was the end of the story. But again, like most things, we can't think that way. There's going to be no Messiah, there's going to be no event that's going to be the solve-all. We have to look at it as I was talking about earlier, in terms of steps, and building and being more successful each time if we can, but build towards a grand theme of having this occur everywhere constantly over the months and years that would have followed the event in 2007.
Yeah. Well, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like there was people who had more energy back then than it seems to now, because what happened at that time was, now the conservative people that were in charge, they were in charge of this organization, right. But they were in the minority, and what ended up happening is a whole bunch of people got pissed off, right. And they migrated from this organization into RSOL and into SOSN, and that benefited them, and that's what I talk about, because what happened was these people came in and they're like, we want to do stuff. They organized. We can't. They came up with the 50 state concept, the chapter concept,
right.
And now we have the movement as it stands today because of what happened at this event.
I think the excitement that we had leading up to the Columbus event was simply that here's a group of downtrodden, beaten down people having the temerity to put together a rise up challenge to the system. And it's going to be in Columbus, Ohio, a state that's looking at this ugly Adam Walsh Act that's in the form of Senate Bill 10 at the time. And the fact that we had the guts and that somebody, I mean, if I were outside of this group who, maybe a registrant not involved in the project, looking at this, I say, my God, these guys have, you know what, down there. I mean, they've got those, you got a pair of them and they're going to use that pair in their courage and tenacity to challenge the system. That by itself is exciting because up to that point in time, we continue to be in the primordial ooze, not having risen out of it maybe yet. We're still trying different places, but that was a direct challenge to the man, to the system, to the establishment. And we were gesturing to the establishment, we're here, we're challenging you, you're wrong, we're right. And I think that's what got a lot of people excited.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, but I've always credited this event, and everybody that was involved in it, and the events that happened, even the drama, the stuff that seemed negative at the time, which it led to big things, as I just mentioned. How when everybody left this one organization and they branched out, and now we wanted to do something more than what we had been doing for the first 10 to 15 years. This movement has been in existence, and of course it grew into what we have today and everything. But somehow I feel like we've lost that mojo a little bit too. I mean, I don't know if there's any one thing that we can point to as a cause of it, but.
Well, I think there is, and again it gets back to allowing yourself to be intimidated. These people elected to the legislatures, they're not smart people. They're not smarter than you are. They're just ordinary people. They're the people that live down the block from your house. They're the people that live across the state in similar circumstances, and they get an idea about possible new laws or fixing a problem in society. They run for office, they get elected. They're educated by the same media that you are. So they're not special, they're not smarter than you are. But yet they bring this great harm to our families, we, the registered families of America. They bring a lot of pain to us because they're not informed. So it's our job to be not intimidated by them or their ideas, but to be counter-challengers, to challenge them, to provoke them into seeing the wrong nature of these registry laws, these blacklist laws that I call them, and turn them around. So we should be grateful that we understand the basics of the argument and take that and challenge them. Take it to the testimony tables, take it to the streets in initiatives that ask to repeal these laws in various states. Take it to Washington, D.C., to the nation's capital, and the various administrative offices there regarding the registry, and take it to them up front. I think that's where we have to go, and I think that we're starting to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think, personally, my personal opinion is you and everybody else involved in all this, what happened in Columbus should take pride in being a significant part in the history of this cause. And I'm not just blowing smoke here. It's that was an observer standpoint. I was just a bystander at the events, and so I'm just I was merely a witness to what happened, and of course, it inspired me to take what I was doing at that time and take it to the next level. So a few days later, I created oncefallen.com, and of course I joined up with you with So Clear, and we had quite a group in So Clear Media, and the people that was in that group at that time, most of us have gone on to do even bigger things. So, I mean, do you see, what happened as really being, do you see it as being a significant event in the way that I do?
Well, in my own life, in my own activities as a challenger to bad laws, and I'm not only involved in the repeal the registry law here in Oregon and various efforts across the country, but and other categories of whether it's war, fighting against economic dispossession, whatever it might be. So I see it as a high point in my own career as an activist, as an activist learning the ropes. I mean, I don't come ready-made with 20 years of experience. I was like most other people, do our best, we'll get out there, we'll give our talks, we'll try to impress the audience, try to have the media cover our side of the story, but quite frankly, we were all novices, and I was too. And it was just a great experience to learn from other people as we traded ideas and built this December 1st, 2007 project the way it turned out. And I was very happy the way it turned out.
Yeah, well, I'm glad the way it turned out too. In closing on this half of our discussion today, is there anything that you would want people to know, specifically about this event and its significance that you feel that we haven't already covered?
I don't think so. I think we've been pretty thorough in it. I think so.
Yeah. I know what I want people to take away the fact that, I personally feel, just my opinion that, I feel like people were hungry, really hungry back then, and they were willing to go the extra mile. And maybe if people take time to go back and watch this video again, I mean, it's, we have the benefit of hindsight, and we're continuously evolving and being able to do things better than we used to back then. But I mean, it was quite an effort. And I don't think that we've had too many events that have been as large as that since then. I mean, even since that time, I said for maybe the RSOL conferences or whatever. But, I really hope that people go back and watch. There should be a link. I should have a link to it, in the description when I post the video up on YouTube, so you can go and check it out. I have all but the one interview, because my video cut off on it anyways. But we were out there in the cold, and you can watch it with us, and you can even see when we went and confronted the vigilantes, because I went out there with my camera. I had my camera still turned on, and I went over and talked with these bikers against child abuse people, and I actually got them to agree with some things I was saying, much to their embarrassment. But so anyways, you guys, anybody watching this, I hope you check that out as well. It's a very significant portion of our, very significant in the history of our cause.